Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. There we go. Got a little bit going on, trying a new format. We are streaming live from YouTube Live. Please make sure you put any questions or comments you've got in the chat as we go, so we can ask them all at the end. We'll answer as many as we can at the end. If you've got any feedback, feel free to save that for the post-event email. Before we crack into the main content, I would like to let you know that DIAS acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders today. The DIAS office in Melbourne is on Queen Street in the city. I'm in Fitzroy. That's all Wurundjeri land, who are peoples of the Kulin Nation. But there's also a lot of people from other places around Australia and indeed the rest of the world. So it's good to just acknowledge that. Now I'll hand over to Mike to intro the rest of the content.
Thanks, Andreas. Just a quick mention on today's content. It comes from the keynotes from Google I/O and WWDC. It also comes from many of the event sessions, and there was about 175 that went live as part of WWDC and 99 from Google I/O. Now, we haven't quite watched them all, but we've watched a bunch of them. So that's where all this information is coming from today.
So a little intro of Mike and Trevor. They've both been at DIAS for a while. They're doing cross-platform mobile, and also historically we've all done a bit of native mobile stuff. Mike actually went over to the US for I/O, and I think not dub, but there's been a lot of videos. Yep. So yeah. We're in good hands with experienced people. Mike, I think you can kick on to the rest of the content.
Okay, we'll kick it off from here. Buckle up. This will be fast. You might want to boost the volume a little bit on your computers as well, but here we go. Google I/O Connect, which was 2 weeks later, was similar in 2023 to previous years. Along with the keynote and developers keynote, Google released about 99 sessions on various tech topics. After all, the event is targeted at developers. So let's go through some of the key things that jumped out to us.
Flutter 3.10 has brought 100% sound null safety, updated iOS and macOS support. WASM support is experimental, just waiting on the formalization of the WASM GC standard. But already, much of the material library can target WASM as a compile target for the web.
Some changes for iOS are enable spell check in editable text widget. So now it's the same across all platforms. The Cupertino checkbox, updated the context menu for better fidelity, and wireless debugging is now available on iOS. This is really useful, considering the lack of ports some MacBook Pros have. Flutter 3.10 has a near complete implementation of Material 3. You need to opt in when declaring your theme data with the flag Use Material 3. One of the coolest parts is being able to generate a complete color scheme from a seed color. For me, that means a good looking color scheme straight away. The missing parts are the fixed family of colors along with surface container family of colors. According to the roadmap, these are currently being worked on. Records allow the passing of multiple typed values to and from functions. With destructuring, we are able to access the values of a record. Records can be defined with name parameters and can also be used to define type defs. This allows our code to be cleaner and easier to read. This is the single most exciting feature in Dart 3. It allows us to write clean, expressive code, to be able to exhaustively switch on types with compound matching, allowing us to easily implement the either pattern for error handling, allowing for a more functional approach to error handling, for instance. With the introduction of class modifiers, this will give devs more control over the class structure of their projects. We will be able to enforce the open-close principle. With the introduction of interface, base, and final class modifiers, we can control what is extended and how a class is implemented and enforce contracts. Also, with sealed classes, which allow subclasses only in the same file, we are able to control the range of classes in a project. This is very useful in block for defining state and event classes, for instance, all of which then ties into the pattern matching mentioned earlier. Salsa Level 1 is Supply Chain Levels of Software Artifacts Level 1, which all Dart and Flutter SDK artifacts have achieved. This is important because it gives a level of assurance of the security of the artifacts delivered are genuine and have not been tampered with. In the case of Flutter and Dart, the SDKs. And it is a start for implementing Salsa in our own systems. Okay, this is the coolest looking feature. Adding the ability to use fragment shaders for the web. It's already available for mobile and desktop. Using OpenGL shader language as assets in a project lifts graphics impact across an application. I urge you to try the Shaders Code Lab. It's awesome. Impeller is the default renderer for iOS. This was implemented to remove the dreaded startup jank on iOS. Google is still in the process of getting Impeller for Android complete. Impeller will allow for 3D scene rendering. It is still experimental, and to quote Google, there are no guarantees around API stability. But this is very exciting.
Android 14 is bringing some significant changes. Foldables and tablets were prominent in the keynote, with Google launching the Pixel Fold. This is a return to larger screens and more of a multi-form factor approach. Some might remember when Google literally abandoned tablets for several years. So this is arguably fixing a strategic product mistake that saw Apple take most of the tablet market share during these few years. Foldable screens means Android needs to adapt to many more screen sizes and aspect ratios. With foldables now from Samsung, Google, Motorola and others means many different screen sizes and foldable behaviors. So does this mean we should start doing much more testing of our apps on foldables? Probably yes, even though the number of foldables in the field is still small. Also, Android is getting more across-device features, things like handing off from one device to another. Given Apple's ecosystem of devices does this very, very well, I think we can expect more and more of this on Android. Jetpack Compose just keeps getting better and better with new text enhancements, a bunch of other things I won't go into, but some of the new layouts are really, really cool. And it also gets official, well, at least alpha TV support. There is a big push into more privacy and security. This is probably Android trying to catch up. So there's a lot more specific permissions and many more dialogues to be data transparent with users. So look out for some big changes there. Full screen intents need a fair bit of change as well, especially on the lock screen. This is going to be a little bit difficult for some apps. More specific permissions are sort of all over the place, so this is going to be a bit of a migration challenge for some apps. Foreground service changes as well, get a big new focus, so anything that's a long-running job that's initiated by the user, yep, that's going to change. Health Connect is now sort of built into Android 14, coming through Google Play services. This will mean that you can actually guarantee that you can write local health data now in a more private way. There's also a focus on moving from passwords to passkeys, so that's coming in 14. And also there's a new credential manager, so it's bringing together passkeys and traditional sign-on approaches. A few new ML features like document scanner and barcode scanner, so they'll be local. Very useful for apps that use those particular APIs. The other thing is a few user interaction changes. So cached apps. So when you're backgrounding an app, it can now get cached rather than actually completely stopped, but this will provide some changes we need to deal with. A new design hub as well for material design is well overdue. Also, the predictive back gesture where you get a preview before you swipe back is actually sort of getting a lot more solid support in Android 14. Sharing updates on the sharing sheet. Yeah, there's some other interesting changes as well. And we get HDR for the first time on Android, which is fantastic, especially for those devices that have supported it for probably quite a while using their screens. The other thing you may not know too is that Android's going to go 64-bit only very soon. So this is probably something that we all thought was already in there, but it's actually not. IDE-wise, Giraffe is probably more an incremental improvement, nothing major, whereas Hedgehog is the major enhancement we really want to see. Okay, Google Play. So Google's getting a lot more aggressive on the target SDK requirements for publishing apps on Google Play. So this is something we're just going to have to deal with, but it is getting a little bit tougher as time goes by, and they want the latest SDKs, much more aggressively. We did get custom store listings last year, but now we get inactive users, so we can target special Google Play pages to get back users that you've lost. The other thing that pops up too is Bard-powered generative AI store listings. I'm a little bit skeptical about whether this is actually going to be useful, given that marketing often wants to control, with product people like me, the exact message that goes up, but it is there to be used to try and get store listings more quickly and easily, I guess, onto the store. The other thing is machine translations. So it's now going to be much easier to actually get language translations of store content, like the listings, etc., so that we can actually make it easier to support multiple languages. This is probably a little bit overdue. Glad this is coming, but we'll have to see how this actually plays out. Deep links. I should talk about deep links. Validating your deep links is a great feature in Google Play. It's there already a little bit, but this would be great to have better support. Also, app content. There's a huge growing list of app content and policy changes that you need to get right. So Google Play supporting that and giving us more help. Now, data deletion controls and data safety. This is becoming a much bigger thing, kind of following on from what Apple did, but even going further. So what this involves is giving more data transparency, but also making sure that apps support deletion of not just accounts, but also other back-end data. So there's some pretty stringent requirements here, and it's coming up fast. The last thing is, yay, we get a new Google Play console app. There was an existing app, but it was a bit terrible. A little bit ironic that you couldn't manage your mobile app listings on mobile. So this app looks like it's a lot better for just running around and managing your Google Play listings, giving feedback or responding to feedback, all that sort of stuff. So this just should make it a little bit easier on the go to manage Google Play. The Worldwide Developers Conference, WWDC, was a little different this year. As well as the usual keynote and platform State of the Union, Apple released the new Vision Pro headset and 175 tech sessions on various topics. Now, the keynotes always cover many of the consumer-oriented features and enhancements to Apple's products and services, but it's the developer things that we're really more interested in. Hardware-wise, we got some more Macs, a new MacBook Air 15-inch with M2, a new Mac Studio with M2 Ultra, and finally the Mac Pro desktop with M2 Ultra. This now completes the Apple Silicon transition, which took a bit over the originally promised 2 years, but that's okay. This is important for us as developers because now there are no more new Intel models and all platforms from iPhone to Mac and the new headset are on Apple Silicon. So when developing, we can now target only ARM64. Okay, let's talk about a few of the operating system updates. Most of the changes were very Apple servicey consumer related, but let's sort of call out some of the highlights. On iOS, contact posters, which is an interesting idea where you've got a single image that you can change that you use when sharing information or you're calling someone, they see the contact poster for you. Interesting idea. Maybe this can be commercialized so that companies could provide contact posters, not sure. And we can actually mess with it with Toolkit. The other feature that uses contact posters is name drop. Again, this is a bit like a Google feature that was around a few years ago. You exchange contact details. iOS had a bunch of these sort of Apple servicey type changes, but not a lot here for devs on the iOS 17 side. Now, iPadOS has even more modest changes, but there's a few interesting ones, and you'll see that there's a bit of a theme popping up here. Widgets everywhere basically. So the iPad gets interactable widgets, something that we didn't have, and it also gets live activities, a bit like what we have on the dynamic island on iPhones. Even though there is no camera cutout on iPads, you still get these live activities that look a lot like the dynamic island. Here's a look at sort of some of those features for iPadOS, but it's a bit of a lighter release this year for iPadOS. Okay, macOS, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well in the presentation, but just a bit of a really super quick summary. Guess what? We get widgets, yay. So widgets are everywhere this year. Again, we get more widget interactivity and placement on macOS. We also get web apps. You can now do a lot more with web apps in terms of creating shortcuts through Safari. So that's kind of a nice change, really catching up with Chrome. macOS, again, fairly modest feature enhancements, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. watchOS, it's watchOS 10 coming up. And guess what? We have widgets. So lots of widgets now driving a lot of the interface around watchOS, which is really interesting. But it probably leads to a better experience on the watch. But again, we'll have to see how these actually play out and how well they do in terms of apps. This one's nice. I like this one. I like the snow effect. And just a note, developer beta is already out, but public betas are coming in July. So if you're not a developer, you can actually get the public beta in July, which is great. Serious AAA Gaming looks like it just might be coming to the Mac. Now, DS is a software engineering company, but we're not games developers. But we just had to include this gaming section because it's just too cool and potentially industry changing. The new macOS Sonoma gets a dedicated gaming mode which reduces Bluetooth device latency and prioritizes CPU and GPU. Apple wants to use their Metal graphics engine for games, with Metal 3 adding significantly new capabilities last year. But currently the desktop gaming industry is dominated by Windows games using DirectX, especially DirectX 12. Thanks largely to Apple Silicon, Apple did announce several new AAA desktop gaming titles running natively on Mac, But if Apple wants to shift the games industry to deliver significantly more native AAA games, it needs to give them some help. So Apple have released the Game Porting Toolkit, which can actually run DirectX 12 games on a Mac. It uses a special version of Crossover and which uses Wine under the hood, and also uses the Rosetta translation layer to perform this magic, but it works. The target audience of the toolkit is games developers and tech enthusiasts, not consumers. Setup is fiddly, takes about an hour, but the community is already running many AAA DirectX 12 Windows games on their Macs with very good frame rates. Now, this is a great strategic move by Apple, which should result in many more AAA games on Mac over the coming years. Okay, now the Vision Pro and Vision OS. Tim Cook followed the well-worn Steve Jobs tradition by using the phrase "one more thing" to announce the Vision Pro. First thing to say is that this was an announcement and not a launch. You cannot yet buy a Vision Pro headset. Currently, the Vision Pro is pre-release and will not be version 1 until it goes on sale early in 2024. Now, a new platform and form factor is a big deal for any product, so Apple is being very, very careful and strategic about how they bring the Vision Pro to market. Apple is referring to the device as a spatial computing device. It did not mention VR, virtual reality at all, and will probably never use the term the metaverse. This is very much an augmented reality AR headset. Now, the Vision Pro is coming early next year, yes, in early 2024, and will be priced at $3,499 US. Yeah, that's a lot. Now, on current exchange rates, that's about 5,200 Australian dollars, but it's going to be sold exclusively from apple.com and in Apple stores in the United States. Apple says other countries, including the UK and more, should expect Vision Pro to be sold later next year, which is later in 2024. And no specific word on Australia or New Zealand availability has been given at this stage. Just to be clear, I did not get to attend WWDC in person, nor did I try out the headset, but I have watched many YouTubers give their reports and their thoughts and impressions, because many of them, YouTubers and press, had a 30 to 40 minute hands-on experience at Apple Park with the headset. Hardware-wise, the unit's comprised of the headset and an external battery pack. They've done this to reduce the weight of the headset itself, and the weight is unspecified at the moment, but suspected to be just over about 500 grams. Now, the battery pack will last just over 2 hours, but details are a little bit scant, and there is no onboard battery at all. Displays are 2 custom micro OLED displays, which provide, apparently, more pixels than a 4K TV to each eye, or 23 million in total. There's apparently no screen door effect, and the screen door effect is when you can see the pixels or the gap around the pixels when looking at a screen. Apparently this headset does not have that. It's almost like looking at real life. The display quality has actually been described by a few YouTubers as next level and way beyond something like the Meta Quest 2 or the Meta Quest Pro. Now, if you use glasses, the Vision Pro requires magnetically attached corrective lenses from Zeiss. And it also has eye tracking, which is used a little bit like a mouse. So eye tracking is used to focus on what you are looking at, to select objects in the interface, a bit like the PSVR 2. It also has foveated rendering. Now, what's foveated rendering? Foveated rendering is where the screen resolution is actually higher or highest in the areas of the screen that you're looking at, and anything in your peripheral vision is a little bit less crisp. The frequency the displays run at is reportedly 90 Hertz most of the time, except in the odd case when you're watching apparently 24 Hertz video content like movies, at which time it bumps up to 4 times that, being 96 Hertz. The headset has 12 cameras and 5 sensors for monitoring hand gestures and mapping the environment. And there's a camera that allows you to take 3D photos and videos. There's a LiDAR depth sensor, of course, to determine the size and location of objects in the room you're in. And you can also scan your face with it as well to create a digital persona that's used for FaceTime and some other comms applications. There's actually a top head strap that's not shown in a lot of the keynote video. That's used to just stabilize and make the unit slightly more comfortable for longer periods. Okay, the user interface. There are no controllers with this device at all. You use hand gestures that are tracked by the cameras and the LiDAR sensor. As mentioned, eye tracking is used to actually select UI elements and to focus on objects. And this is one of the key things that came out of the feedback, is that this eye tracking is like next level, not like many other existing devices we have that have eye tracking. Gestures are a few. This is what the gestures are. It's basically a pinch to do a single click, and you can actually move your hands to do all the standard gestures that we see in development in spaces, like things like focus, click, hold, drag, that sort of thing. Siri is in there too, so to actually enter text, you actually look at a text field and then speak the text to transcribe it into the field. You can also use a virtual or physical keyboard as well, so they are supported, and there are some other bits of footage that show using games controllers for games, and possibly there'll be other devices as well. The UI elements are actually quite interesting, obviously looking very Mac and Apple-like, and there are some special developer and design kits that will be available, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. So some impressive shadow treatment about when virtual UI objects are moving around in the environment, and just generally overall, it seems like a well thought out UI experience at this stage, especially for what is effectively a pre-version 1 product. So the polish being demonstrated here is quite impressive from Apple. So what about apps and the developer experience? Well, the headset uses 2 separate Apple Silicon chips to deliver such impressive performance, an M2 chip and a new R1 chip used to handle sensor input and to reduce latency. And these are the 2 core chips in the unit that help deliver the lifelike experience. So later this month, yes, this month, there will be a Vision OS SDK. Now, this comprises a few components. So there's an updated Xcode, version 15, and the Vision OS SDK comprises SwiftUI and UIKit, RealityKit, and ARKit. There's also a new tool called Reality Composer Pro. Now, I'm showing a few shots here of sort of some of those experiences that we've seen so far, but I'm sure new details will come once this Vision OS SDK actually lands in about a month or so. Quick note, there is a simulator, so if you do not have a Vision Pro, which is going to be, let's face it, most developers, you can get a simulator for the device, but this apparently requires Xcode 15. The other thing too is, how do we actually get apps once they're built and tested? How do we actually get them out? Well, there will be test flight also for Vision OS. There's also developer documentation, design kits and tools, and an update to the human interface guidelines coming soon as well. Apple's also going to provide a few special things like the Vision Pro Developer Labs in a few key cities around the world. Unfortunately, none of those are in Australia and New Zealand. There's also going to be apparently a Vision Pro Developer Kit available from somewhere in July. We don't know what this is yet. We don't know whether it's a discounted Vision Pro or exactly what it is. But there is more support coming for developers to try and build apps for the Vision Pro. And last but not least here's a few images of the actual Apple Store for Vision Pro apps, but apparently other apps like iPad apps will be available in this same store as well. And then finally, that was the end of WWDC for this year, what is arguably a fairly historic event in the scheme of WWDC's past.
All right. Thanks very much, Mike and Trev, for that. We have not got any comments coming through in YouTube yet, but I will start with some pre-canned kind of prompts that we've got. So let's start with Trev. What was your key takeaway from Google I/O and or WW? Maybe one from each.
Yeah. So for me, both of them were pretty amazing. Like Google I/O was just AI all the way. It was just totally AI, which I thought was really interesting because I think it'll definitely change the way we program, the way we think about programs. And I was also interested in the thinking a bit deeper about some of the ethics around AI and how we're going to use it going forward. So I found that really, really thought-provoking. For WWDC, you can't go past the Vision Pro. That is just awesome. I really want one. I don't care whether it's useful or not. I just want one. It's just gorgeous. And I'm pretty excited about the idea of how to develop apps for it and looking at what the UX is going to be in using it, how it is going to affect how we interface with computer programs going forward. It reminds me a bit way back. There was an open source project called Looking Glass, or Alice. It was through the Looking Glass, and it had a lot of those ideas of multiple interfaces, but it didn't have that concept of 3D depth, but that this is bringing in, because we've now got the technology to do it. And honestly, I just cannot wait to play with it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Especially since it seems more people are targeting headsets where everything's integrated rather than, the Daydream, which came out 7 years ago as a launch title for the Pixel, which is using the screen that you've already got plugged into a headset as an accessory. So yeah, it's cool to see what's happening with the Quest and the and all the other ones that are coming out, like the Vive, which I haven't heard any updates on recently. I guess we can switch over to you, Mike. What was any of your key takeaways?
For having gone to Google I/O, I got to go to Google I/O in Shoreline, which is really great. By the way, it's really cold in that amphitheater. If you ever go, it's freezing. Take a jacket or two. Yeah, Trev's right. Like it was AI, but probably the overwhelming impression I got from Google I/O, both Google I/O, the keynotes at Shoreline, and Google I/O Connect, which was 2 weeks later in Miami. Google's kind of playing catch up at the moment. Like the AI stuff was almost Google being overtly insecure about being behind on AI, given that Microsoft kind of got the jump start on them with the OpenAI partnership. So from the very first moment that Sundar Pichai, the CEO, stood up and started, almost the first word out of his mouth was AI. It was 2/3 of that first keynote was AI. And it almost seemed like an overcompensation, I have to say. So I think Google are very much playing catch up, but if anyone can catch up, it's Google. So that was my overriding impression from Google I/O. And just to that point, though, some of the other things in Android as well, like foldables are in Android, but there's no foldables in the iOS Apple world at all. I'm not sure whether foldables is going to be a thing. I suspect not. I suspect it feels like another 3D television type era where we get foldables for a while, but then they don't really take off. So we've got enough foldables now, though, to make sure that we test apps on foldables for any of the apps we produce, which is fine, but I don't think it's going to explode. So again, this is a bit of a maybe Google's heading down the wrong path strategically on this. So yeah, that was sort of my overriding impression from a Google point of view. WWDC, yep, Trev stole my thunder. Obviously, the Vision Pro, it was what it was all about. It was interesting that in the keynote, the Vision Pro took over just over 1/3, roughly, of the keynote. And it's clearly a very polished product for being pre-version 1. So as someone who'd been following all the news and the rumors coming up to WWDC, my expectations were exceeded. So that's a good start. And I think Apple seems to have focused on the basics, like the video quality and resolution experience and the UI all seems to be highly polished. So from a hardware point of view, I think they've definitely brought it. I'm a little less enthused and convinced that the software is going to come along. And I think this is just the start of a journey. Like, really, given the price the headset's at, and it's going to take another couple of years before we get a more consumer-friendly priced headset, this is going to be a long journey, but it's the beginning of us getting away from, touching 2D screens everywhere and getting into sort of 3D interfaces. So it's going to be a long journey. And there was one other thing that I'll just squeeze in that didn't get mentioned at WWDC is the European Union has passed laws about side loading of apps now. And I believe the deadline is March 2024, but I haven't seen any mention of that so far. Breaking down the Apple walled garden and being able to sideload iOS apps to your iPhone, we have to wait and see on what's going to happen there.
Yeah, cool. I guess the rollout of the VR might be kind of like, the Vision Pro might be kind of like the Watch rollout, which started off mostly as kind of a dev kit tech demo thing, and then eventually, give it 5-10 years, it's become a lot more ubiquitous, and they've polished off all the rough edges.
Yeah, totally. And just to Trev's point too, if the founders are watching, yes, we want to expense a Vision Pro headset, please. But I'm not sure that'll be forthcoming. Two.
I want one. You want one.
We can share. But look, it's going to be a long journey, but it's certainly an interesting space that I know you know quite a lot about, Andreas. So
yeah, it should be exciting. We haven't done heaps of 3D AR VR stuff for a little while. I think the last thing I worked on was with realestate.com.au with Real Estate VR, which was a Pixel launch title. So that was like 7 years ago. A few other people have worked on other things, but it's been a little bit quiet recently. So it'll be exciting to see how much this can bridge the gap between entertainment and business, which was always kind of the issue for VR. But yeah, should be exciting. Watch this space. We've got one question that's come through so far. So any word on why Apple isn't offering Vulcan as a graphics API for games?
I'll probably take this one. Vulcan, highly prominent in the Android space as a graphics API for games. It's very, 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 very clear, and that Apple wants to make sure that games target Metal, and Metal 3 at the moment is the current version of Metal. They don't want to go through Vulcan. They don't want a third-party API sort of layer in their stack. We will provide, by the way, a whole bunch of links on the YouTube video in the description after the event. And there'll be a couple of links in there to a couple of videos by Andrew Tai and some others that sort of go into a little bit more depth about gaming and, what Apple's trying to do. I think it's just the usual walled garden thing where they want to own the whole tech stack top to bottom. I mean, Apple vertically integrates technology into their products, so they want to own as much of that stack as they can. Bringing in Vulcan would sort of, introduce a third party into that stack that they really don't want to do. And based on what we've seen so far with the game migration toolkit, looks like, the tech stack they've got and being able to get games across to Metal. Like, there's a video that we'll provide in the link that shows Diablo 4. Like, I know, Trev, we were talking about it as we were prepping this presentation. You said you were playing Diablo 4. And I said, are you playing on Mac? And you said, no, that'll never happen. Well, it can happen now. So there's example footage of someone playing Diablo 4 using the gaming migration toolkit on a Mac, an Apple Silicon Mac, and getting really, really good frame rates. So short answer is Apple doesn't want to use Vulcan, and it doesn't look like they need to.
And it's a strategy that's worked for them forever. So I can't see them ever changing it either.
By the way, if you jump on the net and sort of Google like the migration toolkit, it's kind of blowing up all over the place. So it's probably one of the biggest takeaways from WWDC, which is kind of why we included it, even though we're not necessarily AAA game devs, because it's just fascinating technologically.
I don't think I'm even a -D game dev.
I haven't done AAA titles since I started at DS, so that's old news. Thanks, Johnny, for that question. We haven't got any other questions, so we'll probably wrap up there.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks.